I mentioned in the previous video that there are two types of margin. There's the initial margin, and just to use the same numbers throughout the problem in my videos, I had set the initial margin at 60%. And there's also the maintenance margin, and in this problem I set the maintenance margin at 35%. The maintenance margin is always below the initial margin, and basically that's going to allow your account to have some volatility, and your equity can rise and fall as the prices of your portfolio, the values of your portfolio changes over time. But if your margin, if your equity percentage falls below maintenance, you will get a margin call from your broker. Basically, your broker is going to call you and say, hey, your equity is too low, you need to fix that. And in a later video, I'll talk about how to fix it. So if your margin percentage falls below maintenance, you'll get a margin call. But if your margin percentage falls below initial but remains above maintenance, your account will be what they call restricted, which simply means that you can make trades, but you have to put up 100% of the purchase price until your percentage equity gets above 60%. I had actually meant to discuss that in the previous video, but I forgot. Now I want to discuss something called pyramiding. And that's not the same as a pyramid scheme that you may have heard about. Pyramiding with a margin account is actually entirely legal. Essentially what it means is you want to purchase additional stock or investments on margin, actually on what they would call a 0% margin, until your initial margin is at 60%. Now you can only pyramid when the value of your, or I'll phrase it this way, you can only pyramid when your actual margin percentage is higher than the initial margin. And the goal with pyramiding is essentially using that extra margin that you've got over and above initial to serve as your collateral or contribution toward the purchase of additional securities, where you borrow all the money from your broker. But you can't borrow so much that the margin value of your account drops below 60%. And I know that actually sounds kind of complicated. So let's continue with the Apple example. And the scenario with the Apple example is your initial purchase price was $485, and you bought 100 shares. So it cost you a total of $48,500. But you borrowed 40% of that from your broker. So you owe your broker $48,500 times 40%, or $19,400. And you owe your broker that whether the price rises or falls. So I just want to look at this scenario. Let's say Apple's price rises to $550. So here's the new price. You still own 100 shares. And let's just say Apple is the only stock in your portfolio. They actually do all these calculations on a portfolio-wide basis, but I'm only going to use a single stock because it makes the math a lot easier. So your portfolio is worth now $55,000. You still owe your broker $19,400. Because the amount you owe your broker has not changed, your equity has risen. When you first bought into your position, your equity was 60%, or the difference between the $48,500 and the $19,400. So initially your equity was $29,100. And just to prove that it was 60%, I'll just calculate the percentage. So the $29,100 divided by the total value of your portfolio of $48,500 gives me that 60%. But now your portfolio value has risen to $55,000. You still just owe your broker $19,400, so your equity is the difference of $35,600. As a percentage, that's 35,600 divided by 55,000. My equity is now up to 64.73%. I have extra equity. I am only required, in the sense of not having a restricted account, to have 60% equity. So I have an extra 4.73% of equity. And I can leave it like that and everything would be fine. My broker wouldn't be upset. I wouldn't really be upset. But what some people are interested in doing is leveraging as much as they're legally allowed to do without restricting their account. And that is not having an equity amount in excess of 60%. So what you are actually allowed to do, if you want to, is use this extra equity to purchase additional shares of stock where you don't actually contribute anything. So what I'm going to do is just work this in Excel first and then show you how to do this the long way. I think it's actually a little easier to explain if I show you in Excel before I just throw a formula out there. So what I'm going to do is put my current position, which is I own 100 shares of Apple at $550 each. And then I can buy some more. I don't know how many. Right now I'm just going to put 0. And so then my new position would include the 55,000 that I already own plus the extra that I purchase. My current loan with my broker is the 19,400. I'm just going to link that. Oops. I'll just link it. When I buy these additional shares, I don't actually put up any of the purchase price. I will borrow the entire purchase price. So I'm going to put extra borrowing. And so, again, whatever amount goes here, all of it will be borrowed from the broker. So I'm just going to create a link to that cell. So my new loan amount would be the sum of the 19,400 plus whatever I borrowed to buy more shares. And my equity, I should write that as equity percentage. My equity percentage will be the total value of my portfolio after I buy the new stuff minus the loan. So all of that will give me my equity. And as a percentage, I divide it by the total value of my portfolio. This, right now it's 55,000, but it'll be more in a minute. So here's my current position. My equity is, again, that 64.73. And what I can do is buy some more shares of Apple or a different company. I'm just going to pretend Apple's the only stock in my universe, and so if I buy new shares, it has to be Apple. So let's just say I bought $1,000 worth of Apple. Notice that it popped that into my extra borrowing. I now owe a total of $20,400 instead of $19,400, and my equity has dropped some. If I borrow $3,000, again, my portfolio value has risen, but my loan amount has risen as well, and my equity percentage is dropping. If I borrow $10,000 worth, I now have a portfolio value of $65,000. All of that extra was financed by borrowing, and my equity has dropped to something less than 60%. Which means my account is restricted, and that's not what I want. So my question is, how much do I need to borrow so that I get this equity percentage to exactly 60%? And I'm just going to use goal seek, which is under data what if analysis. And I'm going to say set M4 to 60% or 0.6 by changing J to the extra amount that I'm going to buy, financing it all with borrowing. So how much can this be so that this equity percentage is exactly 60? And the answer is $4,341.88. So if Apple cost $550 right now, that would be 7.89 shares. Hopefully this makes sense. Try watching it one more time if it doesn't. Students usually relate pretty well to this explanation though. What I want to show you now is how to calculate this share amount or this dollar amount in using an equation, because you're not going to have Excel available to you. So the equation that I'm going to use is an equation that I will use for almost every type of margin problem that we're going to do. And the equation is your margin percentage is equal to the total market value of your portfolio minus what you owe your broker divided by the total market value of your portfolio. And again, this is a very general equation, but it will work with every type of long margin position that I can think of. It's just a matter of whether you're buying more stock, what that's going to do to your portfolio, whether you're going to borrow the money that you use to buy the stock from your broker or put it all up yourself, and whether or not you're selling stock to lower the market value of your portfolio. And you might even sell stock and use the money that you generate to pay off all or some of the loan that you owe your broker. So it's just a matter of thinking through your action and applying it algebraically to whichever variable in this equation it's going to impact. Now in this case, what we're doing is pyramiding. So we are going to buy more shares, and all of the money will be borrowed from our broker. So with this in mind, I'm now going to calculate each term for the equation on the left. So sometimes when I use this equation, I'll be solving for the margin percentage. Sometimes when I use this equation, I will be inputting a margin percentage and solving for something else. And that's the case with the pyramid example. With the pyramid example, I know I'm striving for a margin of 60%. The total market value of my portfolio in my one stock world of Apple, right now I own 100 shares, but I'm going to be buying some more, and I just don't know yet how many more I'm going to buy, so I'm going to call that X. But I do know they'll all be worth $550. Subtract what I owe my broker. Well, initially I owed them $19,400, but I'm going to owe them some more in a bit. All of the purchase price of the new shares of Apple that I buy, which will cost $550 a share times X shares. My denominator is just this portion of the numerator. So this bit right here. So 100 plus X times 550. So practice your algebra if you don't remember it, but 550 times 100 is 55,000 times 0.6 is 33,000. And I guess I'll go ahead and write this all out. I normally would skip some steps, I think, but just as a little bit of practice or review of algebra, I'll write it all out. So what I'm going to do is multiply everything to get rid of my parentheses. So 100 times 550 is 55,000 plus 550x. And now I'm going to work through, get this parentheses, get rid of this parentheses, so subtract 19,400 and also subtract 550x. And this would be divided by 55,000 plus 550x. And now what I'll do is cross multiply. I was actually homeschooling my son in geometry one year, and he said he was never taught the cross multiplication thing, so I just thought I would remind y'all about it, and hopefully you were taught that. So now what I'm going to do is take this denominator and multiply it by 0.6. So 55,000 times 0.6 is 33,000 plus 550x times 0.6, which would be 330x. And then this 550x and this 550x cancel, which is great. And then 55,000 minus 19,400 is 35,600. So now I will subtract 33,000 from both sides to give me 330x and 2,600. Divide both sides by 330. And I get 7.87879. And looking at my equation, you can see my x in this particular case was the number of shares of Apple that I was going to purchase. So there's the 7.88 shares, which was the same answer that I got when I solved for this in Excel. This, though, is the equation and the process that I want y'all to use on the test and in class.